A gang of racist men, united by hatred and arrogance, believed they were untouchable. To them, the pair of black twins they cornered on an empty road were easy prey. The gang's confidence was palpable, their taunts dripping with contempt as they circled, mistaking calm for weakness and silence for submission. They saw two women they could intimidate, humiliate, and dominate. What they couldn't see was the fire simmering beneath the surface. They didn't know these women had spent years honing their skills in the most elite military operations, surviving challenges that would have broken the gang's bravado in seconds. As the insults escalated into threats and the tension reached a breaking point, the gang unknowingly crossed a line that could never be undone. What began as an act of intimidation would ignite a storm that would upend the gang's network, expose their sinister operation, and leave them scrambling to recover from a reckoning they never saw coming. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the bustling city streets as Amara and Naomi strolled along the sidewalk. They rarely had time for moments like this, a chance to enjoy the peace of civilian life away from the endless chaos of missions and training. Clad in casual attire, the Johnson twins blended into the crowd, their confident strides and sharp eyes giving only the faintest hint of the warriors beneath. "It's been way too long since we had real downtime," Naomi said, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "You think we'll actually get through a day without some kind of emergency?" Amara smirked. "Doubt it. Trouble tends to find us, doesn't it?" Naomi chuckled, but her gaze lingered on a group of men loitering near a parked truck up ahead. Their shaved heads glinted in the sunlight, and their tattoo-covered arms were folded as they leaned against the vehicle, watching the twins approach. Amara noticed them too, her instinct kicking in. "Keep walking," she said under her breath. "I am," Naomi replied, her voice low, "but they're definitely looking for trouble." As the twins moved closer, the murmurs from the group grew louder. The men exchanged smirks and muttered comments that were loud enough to carry. Amara's shoulders tensed, but she kept her expression neutral. "They're baiting us," Naomi muttered. "Let them try," Amara replied, her tone cool but firm. As they passed, one of the men straightened and took a step forward, blocking their path. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "What's the rush? We don't get many like you around here." The group behind him laughed, their voices rough and cruel. Amara and Naomi stopped, their calm demeanors masking the tension brewing beneath the surface. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Amara asked, her voice steady. "Oh, you know," the man said, his grin widening. "Your kind, always showing up where you don't belong." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent, her gaze locked on the man in front of them. Amara, however, stepped forward, her voice taking on a sharp edge. Amara's eyes narrowed at the man's smug grin. "Our kind?" she repeated, her tone cutting but calm. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The man chuckled, leaning slightly forward, clearly enjoying the attention of his crew. "Oh, you know," he said, dragging out the words. "Your kind, always showing up where you're not wanted, bringing trouble with you. Guess someone's got to say it." Naomi shifted slightly, her stance casual but calculated. She was already assessing the situation. 5 men, all bigger than her and Amara, but their postures screamed arrogance, not skill. She glanced at Amara, who was far less interested in restraint. "Trouble?" Amara asked, tilting her head. "You think we're the ones bringing trouble?" One of the other men snorted, crossing his tattooed arms over his chest. "Look at the numbers, sweetheart. Crime's been going through the roof in this country, and guess who's responsible? You don't have to be a genius to figure it out." Naomi raised an eyebrow, her voice calm and deliberate. "And I'm guessing you think you've got it all figured out?" The leader's grin widened, emboldened by the murmurs of approval from his crew. "It's not hard to connect the dots. The statistics don't lie. Black neighborhoods, black crime, that's just the way it is. You people ruin everything you touch." Amara took a step forward, her jaw tightening as she locked eyes with him. "Statistics don't lie," she echoed. "You sure about that?" Or do you just cherry-pick the ones that make you feel better about yourself? The man's grin faltered, but he recovered quickly, his voice rising. Yeah, we've all seen the numbers. Theft, assault, murder, your kind's at the top of every list. And here you are, acting like you're above it all. The hypocrisy hit like a slap, and Amara's lips curled into a humorless smile. So, let me get this straight, she said, her tone icy. You think people like us are the reason for all the crime in this country, while you stand here harassing strangers on the street, loitering, intimidating people? How's that any different? The man's face flushed red as his crew shifted uncomfortably behind him. One of them muttered, "They think they're clever." Naomi's gaze flicked to him before returning to the leader. Her voice was calm, but laced with sharp precision. It's ironic, isn't it? You're so quick to point fingers at everyone else, but what exactly do you contribute to society? What jobs do you have? What good do you do? The leader bristled, his fists clenching at his sides. Don't you dare turn this around on me, he growled. We're protecting this place. Protecting it from people like you who come in and destroy everything. Protecting it? Amara scoffed, taking another step forward. Her voice remained steady, but there was a dangerous edge to it now. Is that what you call standing around, picking fights with people who've done nothing to you? You're not protecting anything. You're just scared. Scared that the world is moving on without you. His face twisted with anger, but he quickly covered it with a sneer. You think you're better than us? That's the problem with your kind. Always acting like you're victims, like the world owes you something. Amara's eyes burned with quiet fury, but her tone remained steady. Victims? Don't twist this. You're the one crying about how unfair the world is because it's not the way you want it to be. And let's not forget, every word out of your mouth proves you're the problem, not the solution. Naomi stepped closer to Amara, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. It's funny. You talk about crime statistics like you're some kind of expert, but I'd love to see the numbers on what your little gang contributes. How much theft? Extortion? Assault? Or do those crimes magically not count when you do them? The gang leader's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. He glanced back at his crew, searching for support, but they looked increasingly uneasy. The truth in Naomi's words hung heavy in the air. Watch your mouth, he snapped, his voice rising. You don't know who you're talking to. Amara stepped even closer, her posture calm but commanding. I know exactly who I'm talking to. A coward. A hypocrite. And if you don't want everyone on this street to see just how pathetic you are, I suggest you walk away now. The man's face flushed deep red, his fists trembling as he took an involuntary step forward. You think you're so tough, he snarled. Why don't you prove it? Amara didn't flinch. She stared him down, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. Trust me. You don't want to see what happens if we do. The tension crackled like a live wire, but no one moved yet. The gang members circled closer, their hands twitching at their sides. Naomi shifted slightly, her eyes scanning for the first sign of violence, ready to act if it came to that. But for now, the fight was held at bay, the air thick with the promise of what was coming next. The air between them bristled with tension, the gang's smug arrogance only growing as Amara's warning hung in the air. She stood firm, her tone unwavering. This is your last chance, Amara said, her gaze locked on the leader. Walk away. Now. The leader's smirk widened, his eyes narrowing as he took another step forward. You think you're in a position to be giving orders? He asked, his voice low and mocking. Nah, see, we don't walk away. That's not how this works. Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him. And how exactly does it work? She asked, her voice calm but cutting. The man chuckled, gesturing to his crew, who stood around him like vultures circling a carcass. Simple. We keep things in line. People like you step out of place, and we make sure you remember where you belong. Amara's fists tightened at her sides, but she kept her voice steady. And who decided that was your job? The man leaned in slightly, his smirk twisting into something darker. "It's always been our job," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think all this is random? We've got orders. We're not the only ones out here, and you're not the only ones we've dealt with. Every time someone like you shows up, thinking they can just walk around like they own the place, we make sure you know better." Naomi's gaze sharpened, the weight of his words settling in. "So, this is what you do," she said, her tone even. "You hunt down people like us, harass us, attack us, all because someone told you to?" "Damn right," one of the other men chimed in, his voice rough and full of pride. "We've got a system. No one's going to say it out loud, but everyone knows it needs to be done. People like you, you're ruining this country, and we're the ones cleaning it up." Amara let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. "Cleaning it up?" she echoed, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You're a bunch of criminals standing on a street corner, harassing strangers. How exactly is that making anything better?" The leader bristled at her words, his smirk slipping for just a moment. "You don't get it," he spat. "You people, always playing the victim, acting like the world owes you something. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to deal with the mess you make." Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice remained controlled. "You want to talk about messes? Let's talk about the drugs you push, the people you extort, the families you destroy. Who's cleaning up after you?" The gang fell silent for a beat, their leader's face twisting with barely concealed fury. One of the men behind him muttered, "They think they're better than us." Amara's eyes locked on the leader, her voice dropping to a cold, steady tone. "We are better than you, and you know it. That's why you do this. Why you go after people who look like us. It's not about cleaning up anything. It's about control. You're scared, so you lash out." The leader's fists clenched at his sides, his voice rising as he tried to regain the upper hand. "Scared? Of what? You? Don't make me laugh. You don't belong here, and you never will. This country's going to hell because of people like you, and someone's got to take a stand." Another gang member laughed, his voice harsh and mocking. "Yeah, look at you, acting all high and mighty, like you're untouchable. Newsflash, you're not. And we've made plenty of people like you realize that the hard way." Naomi stepped closer to Amara, her voice quiet but firm. "They're not just thugs," she said, loud enough for the gang to hear. "They think they're soldiers in some kind of war, but all they're doing is spreading hate and destruction." The leader sneered at her, his voice dripping with condescension. "Call it what you want," he said. "We know the truth. You people don't build anything. You just take and destroy. That's why we're here, to stop you from dragging the rest of us down with you." Amara's patience was nearly gone, but she held her ground. "You're cowards," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "You talk about cleaning up the country, but all you do is spread fear and chaos. You're the ones dragging us all down, and deep down, you know it." The gang leader stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. "You think you're tough? Think you're gonna scare us off with your little speech?" He barked a laugh, gesturing to his crew. "Come on, boys. Let's show them how things really work." Naomi's gaze darted between the men, her stance shifting slightly as she prepared for what was coming. "You've already lost," she said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." The gang laughed, closing the circle around the twins, their confidence radiating off them in waves. The tension in the air was palpable, the storm ready to break. The gang leader's smirk twisted into a sneer as he gestured to his crew. "Show them what happens when you don't know your place." Without warning, one of the men lunged at Amara, his arms outstretched in a clumsy attempt to grab her. She reacted instantly, her training kicking in. Stepping to the side, she caught his wrist and twisted it sharply, forcing him to cry out in pain before driving her elbow into his ribs. He collapsed to the ground, gasping. Another man charged Naomi from behind, but she ducked under his swing and pivoted. Her foot snapped upward, striking his knee and sending him stumbling. Before he could recover, she delivered a precise strike to his temple, dropping him. "They're faster than they look." one of the gang members shouted, but his words were drowned out by the sound of fists colliding with flesh. Two men rushed Amara at once, their sheer size and strength forcing her to retreat a few steps. One swung wildly, but she weaved under his punch and retaliated with a powerful uppercut to his jaw. The second man tried to grab her from behind, but Naomi was already there, slamming her heel into the back of his knee and sending him sprawling. "They're not just fast," Naomi said, her voice calm even in the chaos. "They know what they're doing." Amara nodded, catching her breath. "And they're about to regret underestimating us." The gang regrouped, their expressions no longer smug but furious. The leader barked orders, his voice laced with frustration. "Get them! Stop playing around!" 3 men moved in unison toward Naomi, their hands reaching for her. She sidestepped one and delivered a sharp elbow to another's throat, forcing him to stumble back, gagging. The third grabbed her arm, but she used his momentum against him, flipping him over her shoulder and slamming him into the pavement. Amara faced off against 2 more, their size and strength forcing her to stay light on her feet. One of them swung a heavy fist, but she ducked and delivered a lightning-fast kick to his knee, making him buckle. The second grabbed her arm, but she twisted free, using the momentum to drive her knee into his stomach. The leader watched from a distance, his face dark with anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled at his crew. "Take them down." Naomi noticed the leader's hesitation and smirked. "He's all talk," she said, her voice carrying over the sounds of the fight. "Doesn't even have the guts to step in himself." Her taunt hit its mark. The leader's face flushed red as he stormed forward, cracking his knuckles. "You're gonna regret that," he snarled. He charged at Naomi, his sheer size and aggression making him more dangerous than the others. She blocked his first swing, but underestimated the force behind it, her feet sliding back slightly. Amara saw the opening and intercepted, landing a sharp kick to the leader's ribs. "Not so tough when it's 2-on-1, huh?" Amara said, her voice mocking. The leader growled, lunging at both of them. Amara ducked under his swing while Naomi stepped in and delivered a precise punch to his kidney. The leader staggered but didn't fall, his anger making him more reckless. Meanwhile, the other gang members regrouped, surrounding the twins. "They can't keep this up forever," one of them muttered, glaring at the women. Naomi smirked, catching the man's gaze. "You'd be surprised." The twins moved in sync, their years of training and natural chemistry making them an unstoppable team. Amara blocked an incoming punch, deflecting it into Naomi's path, who landed a brutal strike to the attacker's nose. Naomi spun and knocked another man off his feet, giving Amara room to deliver a devastating kick to another's chest. The gang, despite their size and numbers, couldn't match the twins' speed, precision, and teamwork. The fight was brutal and relentless, every move calculated to exploit the men's weaknesses. One of the men tried to grab Naomi from behind, but Amara's warning came just in time. "Behind you!" she shouted. Naomi ducked, grabbing the man's wrist and flipping him over her shoulder in one fluid motion. "Got him!" she said, her voice calm as she turned back to face the next opponent. The leader, now breathing heavily, staggered back, clutching his side. "You think this is over?" he spat, glaring at the twins. "We'll see how tough you are when we bring the rest of the crew." Amara's eyes flashed with determination as she stepped forward, her fists still raised. "We're not scared of you," she said coldly. "You picked the wrong fight." The gang leader growled, but didn't make another move. His crew was battered and broken, some of them barely able to stand. The twins, though bruised and breathing hard, still stood tall, their eyes daring him to try again. The fight wasn't over yet, but the tide had shifted, and the gang was beginning to realize they were in way over their heads. The gang leader wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth, his glare burning with frustration. "Stop messing around!" he barked at his men, his voice hoarse. "If they won't go down clean, make it dirty." At his words, the gang's demeanor shifted. No more wild punches or sloppy charges. They started moving with more intent, exploiting every opportunity to tip the scales. One of the men, his nose still bleeding from Naomi's earlier strike, grabbed a fistful of her braids and yanked her backward. Naomi let out a sharp grunt as she stumbled, her balance momentarily thrown off. "Let go!" she hissed, twisting her body to break his grip, but he held on, his knuckles white as he used her hair to swing her toward another attacker. Amara saw it happen out of the corner of her eye and made a move to help. But two men cut her off. One of them feinted a punch, forcing her to dodge, while the other lunged and caught her by the arm, twisting it behind her back. "You're not so tough now, are you?" the man sneered as he forced her to the ground. Amara gritted her teeth, planting her knee into the dirt to steady herself. "Still tougher than you," she spat, before twisting her body and slamming the back of her head into his face. The impact forced him to let go, and she rolled to her feet, breathing hard. Meanwhile, Naomi managed to slam her elbow into the man holding her braids, finally breaking free. She turned sharply and delivered a fierce punch to his jaw, sending him stumbling back. But before she could regroup, another gang member came from the side, grabbing her by the shoulder and pulling her away from Amara. "They're splitting us up," Naomi realized, her eyes darting to Amara, who was now fending off two men on the other side of the parking lot. Amara's fists flew as she blocked a punch and countered with a strike to her opponent's ribs. "They think we're easier to handle apart," she called out, ducking under another swing. "They don't know us." Naomi dodged a wild grab and spun to face the two men circling her. "Then let's remind them." The gang pressed their advantage, attacking in pairs to keep the twins off balance. One of the men kicked out at Amara's legs, trying to trip her, while another moved in to grab her from behind. She felt his arms snake around her waist and immediately dropped her weight, making it harder for him to lift her. With a sharp twist, she slammed her elbow into his side, breaking free just as the second man lunged forward. Naomi found herself in a similar predicament, one man rushing her head-on while the other tried to grab her from the side. She sidestepped the first, using his momentum to shove him into the second, but the two quickly recovered, flanking her again. "We need to get back to each other," Naomi called out, her voice strained but clear. Amara caught her sister's words and nodded, her gaze flicking between the men surrounding her. "On my mark," she said, her voice firm. The twins moved as one, years of training and an unspoken connection guiding their actions. Amara feinted toward the man in front of her, drawing his attention, before spinning and delivering a high kick to the one behind her. The moment he staggered back, she bolted toward Naomi, barreling through anyone in her path. Naomi, recognizing the opening, ducked under a swing and darted toward Amara, meeting her halfway. Back to back, they stood surrounded by the gang, their breathing heavy but synchronized. "Together?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Amara smirked. "Always." The gang hesitated, their earlier confidence starting to waver. One of the men glanced at the leader, who was glaring at the twins with clenched fists. "Don't just stand there," he shouted. "Take them down!" The men surged forward again, but this time the twins were ready. Amara caught the first attacker by the wrist, twisting it sharply and using his own momentum to throw him into another man. Naomi spun on her heel, delivering a precise kick to the knee of one man while blocking a punch from another. Their movements were seamless, each twin covering the other's blind spots. When one ducked, the other struck. When one dodged, the other countered. The gang's attempts to isolate them were futile now, their dirty tactics no match for the twins' coordination. The leader growled in frustration, grabbing a metal pipe from the truck bed. "Enough of this!" he bellowed, charging toward them with the weapon raised. Amara and Naomi turned in unison, their eyes locking on him as he rushed forward. "You take the left," Amara said quickly. Naomi nodded. "Got it." The fight was far from over, but the twins were back in control, their chemistry and training turning the tide once again. The gang charged again, but the twins were no longer caught off guard. Amara and Naomi moved with precision, their bodies in perfect sync, dismantling their opponents one by one. Amara blocked a wild swing from one of the gang members, grabbing his arm and twisting it sharply. The man cried out in pain, but before he could recover, she drove her knee into his stomach, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Nearby, Naomi ducked under a pipe swing from another man. She grabbed the weapon mid-swing, wrenching it from his hands and using it to knock his legs out from under him. As he fell, she tossed the pipe to the side and delivered a swift kick to his chest, keeping him down. "Is this the best you've got?" Amara called out, her voice sharp and taunting as she dodged another attacker's punch. She spun around him, planting an elbow into the back of his head and sending him crashing to the ground. The gang's confidence was unraveling. What started as an assured attack had turned into chaos. The men hesitated now, their movements sluggish and uncertain as they glanced at each other for guidance. "Stay on them!" the leader barked, his voice cracking with frustration. He stood a few feet away, gripping a metal pipe in his hands. But he didn't make a move toward the twins. Naomi noticed his reluctance and smirked. "Your boys don't look too sure about this anymore," she said, nodding toward the scattered gang members. "Maybe it's time to admit you're in over your head." The leader's jaw clenched, his knuckles tightening around the pipe. "Shut your mouth," he growled, but his crew was already starting to back away. One of the men wiped blood from his nose and glanced at the leader. "We can't take them, man," he muttered. "They're not normal." "You cowards," the leader spat, his face red with anger. "You're just gonna let them win?" Another gang member shook his head, stepping back toward the truck. "I'm not getting paid enough for this," he muttered before turning and running. It was like a dam breaking. One by one, the gang members broke off, limping or staggering away as the twins advanced. Amara's eyes followed each of them, her posture relaxed but ready, daring anyone to try again. "Yeah, that's what I thought," she muttered, as the last of the stragglers took off. Only the leader remained now, standing alone in the middle of the lot. His grip on the metal pipe tightened, and his eyes darted between Amara and Naomi. His breath came in shallow gasps, his earlier bravado completely stripped away. "Looks like it's just you," Naomi said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "So, what's it gonna be? You running too?" The leader snarled, taking a shaky step forward. "I'm not scared of you," he hissed, though his trembling hands betrayed him. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with." Amara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small, humorless smile. "We're not the ones running. So yeah, I think we know exactly who we're messing with." The leader roared in frustration and charged at them, swinging the pipe wildly. Naomi sidestepped his first swing, forcing him to overextend, while Amara moved in from the opposite side. As the leader tried to recover, Amara delivered a swift punch to his ribs, causing him to stagger. Naomi followed up with a sharp kick to the back of his knee, forcing him to drop the pipe and fall forward. "You're done," Amara said coldly, stepping toward him. But the leader wasn't ready to give up. With a guttural yell, he pushed off the ground and tried to run toward the truck parked at the edge of the lot. "Oh no, you don't," Naomi muttered, already sprinting after him. Amara was right behind her, their footsteps pounding against the pavement as they closed the distance. The leader made it to the truck and yanked the door open, but before he could climb inside, the twins reached him. Amara grabbed his arm and pulled him back, while Naomi tackled him low, sending him sprawling to the ground with a heavy thud. He groaned, trying to crawl away, but Amara planted a foot on his back, pinning him in place. "Still not scared?" she asked, leaning down slightly to meet his gaze. The leader glared up at her, his face red and twisted with rage. But he didn't answer. Naomi straightened, brushing dust off her clothes as she caught her breath. "You've got nowhere to go," she said, her voice firm. "It's over." Amara glanced at her sister, then down at the leader. "Not yet," she said quietly, her tone grim. The twins exchanged a knowing look. The fight might have been over, but this was just the beginning. The leader struggled beneath Amara's boot, twisting and grunting as he tried to free himself. His efforts were useless. Her weight held him firm against the cold pavement. Naomi stood nearby, her arms crossed, glaring down at him with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. "You're not going anywhere," Amara said coldly. Her voice carried an edge of fury, barely restrained after the chaos of the fight. "Start talking. Who are you working for?" The man spat onto the ground, his lips curling into a defiant sneer. "Screw you," he growled. Amara's eyes darkened, and she leaned down, pressing her boot harder into his back. "Wrong answer," she hissed. "Do you really want to test us right now? After what we just did to your crew?" Naomi knelt beside him, her voice sharp but steady. "We know this isn't just about your little group. You said you have orders. Who's giving them? What's the plan?" The man let out a bitter laugh, though it sounded hollow. "You think you can scare me? You've got no idea what you're dealing with." Amara crouched down, her face inches from his. "Then enlighten us," she said, her tone low and dangerous. "Because from where I'm standing, you're nothing but a coward leading a pack of idiots." The leader's smirk faltered, his defiance wavering under the weight of their stares. He hesitated, glancing around the empty lot, as if looking for an escape. "There's no one coming to help you," Naomi said, cutting through his silence. "It's just you and us, and we're not leaving until we get answers." The man sighed heavily, his body going limp under Amara's boot. "Fine," he muttered. "You want to know the truth? We're not just some random gang. We're part of something bigger. A lot bigger." Naomi exchanged a quick glance with Amara, her expression hardening. "Keep talking," she ordered. The leader shifted uncomfortably, his voice lowering as if speaking the words out loud made them more real. "We've got chapters everywhere. Different cities, different states. We're connected, organized, and we're doing what no one else has the guts to do." "And what's that?" Amara demanded. "Cleaning house," the man replied, his voice filled with venom. "We're taking back what's ours. Black neighborhoods, black businesses. They're spreading like weeds, choking out everything that's good about this country. So we're stepping in. We push them out, shut them down, make sure they know they'll never belong." Naomi's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. "You target entire communities," she said, her voice sharp with disgust. "Destroy lives, all in the name of your twisted ideology." The leader sneered. "Call it what you want. It works. Every time we move in, people scatter. They know better than to fight back." Amara's eyes burned with fury as she grabbed the collar of his jacket, yanking him slightly off the ground. "You think this is some noble mission? You're nothing but criminals hiding behind a lie. You talk about cleaning house, but all you're doing is spreading filth." The man grinned, blood staining his teeth. "Say what you want," he spat. "We've already made a difference. Your people are scared, and they should be." Naomi stepped closer, her voice deadly quiet. "Not anymore," she said. "You think you can keep doing this? You think no one will fight back? You're wrong." The leader chuckled weakly. "You're just two people. You can't take us all down. This isn't some small-time operation. We've got people in places you can't even imagine. The police? The courts? We've got connections everywhere. You think tonight was bad? This is nothing." The weight of his words settled over the twins like a cold shadow. Amara's grip tightened on his jacket, but her gaze flickered briefly to Naomi, who looked equally unsettled. "This isn't just about this city," Naomi said, her voice quieter now, tinged with realization. "It's a system. They've built an entire network to destroy us." Amara's lips pressed into a thin line as she released the man, letting him fall back to the ground with a thud. "Then we dismantle it," she said firmly, her voice hardening with resolve. Naomi nodded, her expression shifting from anger to determination. "Piece by piece," she said. The leader let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You've got no idea what you're up against. You think you can stop this?" Amara knelt beside him one last time, her eyes blazing. "We don't think," she said. "We know." With that, she stood and motioned to Naomi. "Let's call this in. He's not the only one who's going to answer for this." The twins walked away, leaving the gang leader lying bruised and broken on the ground. But as they moved, the weight of the revelation lingered. This wasn't just about one fight. It was a war, and they were ready to fight it. The cold night air was silent as Amara and Naomi leaned against the hood of their car, the dim glow of a nearby street lamp casting long shadows across their faces. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving a heavy sense of unease in its place. The gang leader's words echoed in their minds, a chilling reminder of how deeply rooted the problem was. Naomi broke the silence first, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This isn't just about one group in one city," she said, her voice low. "This is organized. They've got resources, connections, and a plan. This goes way beyond what we expected." Amara nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground as she processed everything. "He wasn't bluffing," she said quietly. "The way he talked about it, chapters in other cities, people in law enforcement, it lines up with how these kinds of networks operate. If he's telling the truth, this thing could be huge." Naomi exhaled sharply, running a hand through her braids. "So what do? We can't just sit back and let this happen. But if they've got cops in their pocket—" Her voice trailed off, the weight of the implication hanging in the air. Amara straightened, her jaw tightening. "Then we can't trust the system," she said firmly. "At least, not all of it. If we go to the wrong person, we could tip them off and make things worse." Naomi nodded reluctantly. "But we can't handle this alone either. If they really are spread across multiple cities, with people in positions of power—" She shook her head, her voice tinged with frustration. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." Amara looked at her sister, her expression softening slightly. "We've been outnumbered before. Outgunned too. That's never stopped us. This isn't like the missions we've done," Naomi replied, her tone cautious. "This isn't about taking out one high-value target or securing one location. This is systematic. They're targeting black communities on purpose, tearing them apart from the inside. If we mess this up, the consequences could be devastating." Amara fell silent, her eyes narrowing in thought. She paced a few steps away, her boots crunching against the gravel, before turning back to Naomi. "We need intel," she said. "We need to know how deep this goes, who's involved, and where they're operating. If we can map out their network, we'll know where to hit them." Naomi arched an eyebrow. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that? We don't have access to intelligence systems anymore. And even if we did, this kind of operation isn't going to leave an obvious trail." Amara smirked faintly, the fire of determination flickering in her eyes. "We have our own skills, don't we? Recon, infiltration, interrogation. We've done it all before. We don't need an entire agency backing us. We just need a starting point." Naomi sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine. Let's say we figure out where to start. What happens when we find something? Do we take it to the police? The feds? What if they're compromised, too?" Amara hesitated, the question hitting a nerve she wasn't ready to confront. "We can't assume everyone is compromised," she said slowly. "But we also can't trust anyone blindly. We'll have to vet whoever we bring in, test them." Naomi frowned, her skepticism evident. "And if we can't trust anyone, then we do it ourselves," Amara said bluntly. The weight of her words hung in the air, both sisters understanding the magnitude of what that would mean. Taking on an operation this large without backup was risky at best, and suicidal at worst. Naomi leaned back against the car, staring up at the dark sky. "You realize what's at stake, right?" she said softly. "If we go after them and fail, they'll come after us. And not just us. They'll retaliate against the people we're trying to protect. This isn't just about us anymore." Amara nodded, her expression grim. "I know, but if we don't do something, who will? We've seen what happens when people like them go unchecked. They'll keep spreading, keep destroying lives, and no one will stop them." Naomi sighed again, her mind racing with possibilities and risks. "We're going to need more than just a plan," she said finally. "We're going to need allies, and we're going to have to be careful about who we trust." Amara's gaze hardened, her resolve settling into place. "Then we start small," she said. "We work our way up the chain, piece by piece. We make sure we're ready before we make any big moves." Naomi nodded slowly, her earlier skepticism giving way to determination. "Fine," she said. "But we're doing this smart. No rushing in, no taking unnecessary risks. Agreed? Amara smirked faintly. Since when do I take unnecessary risks? Naomi gave her a pointed look. Do you want me to start listing examples? The tension broke slightly as Amara chuckled, shaking her head. Fair enough. Let's focus on the task at hand. We've got a lot of work to do. The twins climbed into their car, the weight of their mission settling over them like a heavy cloak. They didn't know where this path would lead. But one thing was clear. They wouldn't stop until the fight was won. The industrial district was eerily quiet. The faint hum of distant machinery, the only sound as Amara and Naomi parked their car in the shadows of a rusting overpass. The gang leader's earlier confession had left them with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. They couldn't afford to wait. They needed to act. Naomi sat in the driver's seat, her eyes fixed on a rundown building across the street. A dilapidated warehouse with shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls. The twins had spent the last hour trailing one of the gang members who had fled the fight. And now they watched as he slipped into the warehouse through a side entrance. That's our guy, Naomi muttered, glancing at her sister. Amara leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the building. Looks like he's not alone, she said, nodding toward a faint glow coming from one of the upper windows. Shadows moved behind the glass, the faint outline of figures pacing back and forth. Naomi frowned, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. How many do you think? Hard to say, Amara replied, her tone calm but focused. But if he came here after the fight, this place might be important. Could be a meeting spot or a stash house. Naomi nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. Then we need to get inside and see what they're up to. Amara smirked faintly. Recon first, remember? We don't rush in blind. Naomi rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. I know. You'd think I was the one who needed reminding. Amara chuckled quietly as they exited the car, moving silently across the street. The twins stuck to the shadows, their years of training allowing them to blend seamlessly into the darkness. They reached the side of the warehouse, pressing their backs against the cold metal wall. Amara tilted her head toward the side entrance the gang member had used. That's our way in, she whispered. Naomi nodded, peeking around the corner to ensure the coast was clear. Looks quiet, she said, but let's not take any chances. The twins moved in unison, Naomi taking point as Amara covered her. The side entrance creaked slightly as Naomi eased it open, but the noise was swallowed by the hum of machinery inside. The interior of the warehouse was as grimy and chaotic as its exterior suggested. Stacks of broken crates and rusted machinery littered the floor, creating a labyrinth of makeshift hiding spots. Voices echoed from deeper inside, rough and agitated. I told you! They took out Greg's crew, one voice hissed. And I'm telling you, Greg's crew was a joke, another voice replied, louder. You think a couple of chicks are going to take us down? Get real! Naomi and Amara exchanged a glance, their eyes narrowing. The voices were coming from an open area near the center of the warehouse, where a group of gang members stood gathered around a table. A crude map was spread out before them, illuminated by a single dangling light bulb. We're moving the next shipment to the docks tomorrow, one of the men said, jabbing a finger at the map. And after that, we're hitting those new businesses on the east side. Gotta remind them who's in charge. Naomi's jaw tightened, her hand instinctively clenching into a fist. Amara placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, silently urging her to stay calm. Don't worry about Greg's mess, another man said, leaning back against a stack of crates. The higher-ups already know about it. They're sending reinforcements from the next chapter. We'll squash this before it becomes a problem. Reinforcements, Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. Amara's eyes narrowed as she listened. The gang's operation was bigger than they'd imagined. Organized, coordinated, and relentless. One of the men glanced toward the entrance, his voice dropping. Just keep your mouths shut about the cops. If word gets out, we're done for. Naomi stiffened, her mind racing. The leader hadn't been bluffing about their connections. Amara tapped Naomi's arm, signaling her to retreat. They had heard enough. The twins moved silently back the way they had come, slipping out of the warehouse and into the cool night air. Once they were safely back at the car, Naomi let out a sharp breath, her frustration evident. "They're planning another hit," she said, her voice tight. "And reinforcements? How big is this thing?" "Big enough," Amara said grimly. "But now we know where they're going to be. The docks are our next move." Naomi frowned, her gaze distant as she pieced together their next steps. "We're going to need more than just a plan," she said finally. "If they've got reinforcements coming, we'll need to be ready for a fight." Amara nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we hit them before they're ready. Tomorrow, we take the docks." The next day, the early morning mist hung low over the docks, casting an eerie silence over the area. Amara and Naomi crouched behind an abandoned forklift, their sharp eyes scanning the maze of shipping containers. A faint glow from a few dim lights illuminated the gang's makeshift staging area, where several men were huddled together, their voices low but agitated. "That's the target," Naomi murmured, pointing to a group of containers marked with faded gang insignias. "They're getting ready to move something." Amara nodded, her gaze fixed on the scene. "Weapons, drugs, or something worse," she said quietly. "Either way, it's something they don't want anyone finding." They watched as two men emerged from one of the containers, one carrying a clipboard and the other hefting a crate. Their conversation was muffled by the distance, but their body language radiated urgency. "They're gearing up for something big," Naomi said. "This isn't just a local shipment. They've got too much activity here for it to be small time." Amara's jaw tightened. "We need to move before they finish loading up. If we can disrupt this, we might be able to force them to show their hand." Naomi nodded, adjusting her position. "You take left, I'll take right. We'll pin them down," and a sharp whistle cut through the air, freezing both women in place. Amara's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but Naomi raised her hand, signaling her to wait. "Don't even think about it," a deep voice commanded from the shadows. Amara and Naomi turned slowly to see a man step into view, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. He wore a dark suit and an air of authority, a badge clipped to his belt, glinting faintly. "FBI," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Agent Ryan Brooks, and I need you two to stop whatever it is you're about to do." Amara narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. "You've been following us," she said bluntly. Brooks nodded, his expression unreadable. "Not just you. The gang you're tracking has been under surveillance for months. We're in the middle of an operation, and you're about to ruin it." Naomi crossed her arms, her skepticism clear. "Ruin it? We're the only reason these guys are scrambling right now." "You're welcome." Brooks smirked faintly, though his tone remained serious. "I'll give you credit where it's due. You've shaken them up, but if you keep going, you'll blow this whole thing wide open, and they'll scatter." "That's not how we win." Amara stepped forward, her posture defensive. "And how exactly do you plan to win? These guys are organized, dangerous, and tearing apart entire communities. Sitting back and waiting isn't working." Brooks met her gaze evenly. "We're not sitting back. We're dismantling their network piece by piece. This isn't just about one crew or one shipment. It's about the entire operation. If we don't take them down strategically, they'll regroup, and all of this will have been for nothing." Naomi glanced at Amara, her expression cautious. "And what makes you think we're just going to walk away?" Brooks reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded file. "Because I know who you are," he said, holding it up. "Amara and Naomi Johnson, former Navy SEALs, top of your class, with a mission success rate that most teams can't touch. You're good. No, you're great. But this isn't a battlefield. This is a chess game, and if you want to win, you need more than brute force." Amara's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Naomi arched an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "And what's your plan? Let them keep operating until you've built your perfect little case? How many more people have to suffer before you decide it's time to act?" Brooks's expression hardened. "I'm not here to defend the system. I'm here to tell you that if you keep going alone, you're playing into their hands. They've got resources, manpower, and connections you don't. But if you work with us, We can take this whole thing apart." Amara exchanged a look with Naomi, her mind racing. The agent's words carried weight, but trust wasn't something either of them gave easily. "If we work with you, we do it our way," Amara said finally. "No red tape, no waiting for the perfect moment. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast." Brooks smirked slightly. "You'll find I'm not much for red tape," he said. "But if we're doing this, we do it smart. That means gathering intel, coordinating strikes, and making sure we don't just slow them down, we end them." Naomi studied him for a moment before nodding reluctantly. "Fine," she said. "But the second we think you're holding us back, we're out." "Fair enough," Brooks replied, extending a hand. Amara hesitated, then shook it firmly. "All right, Agent Brooks. Let's see what you've got." The tension eased slightly as the twins lowered their guard, but the fire in their eyes remained. They had a new ally, but the fight was far from over. The next morning, the twins found themselves sitting across from Agent Brooks in a nondescript FBI safe house. The room was stark and utilitarian, with little more than a table, a few chairs, and a whiteboard covered in maps and documents. Brooks stood by the board, marker in hand, as he explained the gang's operations. "This is what we've mapped so far," he said, pointing to a sprawling diagram that linked cities, names, and supply routes. "The network spans across 6 states, with at least 4 major hubs we've identified. Each hub manages smaller cells like the one you encountered last night." Amara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the diagram. "What about leadership? Who's calling the shots?" Brooks tapped a photo pinned to the corner of the board. A grainy image of a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. "Martin Kane," he said. "He's the head of the operation. Officially, he's a real estate developer with holdings in multiple cities. Unofficially, he's the one funding and directing this entire network." Naomi crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "And he's untouchable, I assume, for now," Brooks admitted. "We've been gathering evidence to link him to the network. But he's careful. He uses intermediaries to handle everything. Keeps his hands clean." Amara glanced at Naomi, her expression grim. "So, what's the plan? You want us to help you build a case against him?" Brooks shook his head. "Not yet. Right now, we need to cut off his resources. If we disrupt their operations, it'll force Kane to come out of the shadows. The docks were a key point in their supply chain, but they've got other locations we need to hit." He stepped aside, revealing a list of addresses and timestamps. "These are their next targets. We've identified 3 safe houses and a warehouse they use to store weapons and cash. If we take them out, we'll cripple their ability to move supplies and fund their operations." Naomi frowned, her skepticism evident. "Sounds like a solid plan on paper, but how do we know we're not walking into a trap? If they know we're coming, they'll have reinforcements waiting." Brooks nodded, acknowledging her concern. "That's where you come in. You two have the skills to get in and out without being detected. We'll provide support, but the groundwork will be up to you. We need eyes on these locations before we move." Amara leaned back in her chair, considering his words. "And if we find evidence that links these places back to Kane, then we'll move fast," Brooks said. "The goal is to hit them hard enough to destabilize the network, but precise enough to leave a trail that leads back to him." Naomi exchanged a glance with Amara, her expression a mixture of resolve and caution. "All right," she said finally, "but we're not just following orders here. If we see an opportunity to take them down, we're taking it." Brooks smirked faintly. "Fair enough. Just don't blow the whole operation in the process." The twins spent the next few hours poring over the details of the targets, memorizing layouts and potential escape routes. By the time they left the safe house, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Their first target was a safe house on the outskirts of town, a nondescript apartment building that blended seamlessly into the neighborhood. Brooks's intel suggested it was used to store weapons and distribute orders to local cells. "Looks quiet," Naomi said, as they approached the building, keeping to the shadows. "Too quiet," Amara replied, her eyes scanning the area. "Let's stick to the plan. Get in, confirm their activity, and get out." The twins moved like ghosts, slipping through the alleyways, until they reached the back of the building. Naomi picked the lock on the service door with practiced ease, and they slipped inside. The interior was sparse and dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes. Amara led the way, her steps silent as she moved toward the sound of voices coming from one of the rooms. "Shipment's delayed," a man was saying, his tone irritated. "We've got to reroute through the east side." "Yeah, well, tell that to the boss," another voice replied. "He's not going to be happy about this." Amara held up a hand, signaling Naomi to stop. The twins pressed themselves against the wall, listening intently. "We'll make it work," the first man said, "but we've got to keep a tighter leash on the locals. The heat's getting too close. Last thing we need is another screw-up like at the docks." Naomi's lips tightened into a thin line. She glanced at Amara, who nodded. They had heard enough. The twins retreated as quietly as they had entered, slipping out into the night undetected. Back in the car, Amara exhaled slowly, her mind racing. "They're moving faster than we thought," she said. "If we don't hit these places soon, they'll adapt." Naomi nodded, her jaw set. "Then we don't give them the chance. We hit them tonight." Amara smirked faintly. "Just like old times." "Exactly," Naomi said, starting the engine. "Let's finish what we started." The safe house was their first target of the night, but it wasn't going to be the last. Amara and Naomi sat in the back of an unmarked van parked 2 blocks away, reviewing the plan with Agent Brooks. The atmosphere was tense, but the twins remained focused, their expressions sharp and unreadable. "Remember," Brooks said, pointing at the map on the tablet in front of them, "the safe house is likely to have at least 4 people inside, but we can't rule out more. We'll have backup staged nearby, but this is your operation. We need eyes on the interior before we move in." Naomi nodded, tucking a pair of wireless earpieces into her ears. "We'll go in quiet," she said. "Confirm the layout, secure intel, and signal you to move in if necessary." Amara adjusted the strap of her tactical vest, checking her gear. "If we find anything connecting this place to Kane, we'll grab it and get out. No unnecessary risks." Brooks gave them a tight nod. "Good. The team will be on standby. Stay sharp." The twins exited the van and moved through the quiet residential neighborhood with practiced ease, their dark clothing blending seamlessly into the shadows. They approached the rear of the apartment building, the soft glow of a single light spilling out from one of the windows on the second floor. Naomi picked the lock on the service entrance in seconds, and they slipped inside. The building's interior was silent, save for the faint hum of a refrigerator down the hall. They moved in tandem, their footsteps silent as they made their way toward the source of light. The safe house wasn't heavily fortified, but the twins knew better than to let their guard down. Voices drifted from the second-floor apartment. Amara motioned for Naomi to cover her as she crept closer, pressing her ear to the door. "They want everything moved out by morning," a man's voice said. "Boss doesn't want to take any chances after what happened at the docks." "Figures," another voice replied. "We're sitting on a gold mine here. If they find this place, it's over." Amara's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. The gang was spooked, but they weren't retreating. They were consolidating. She motioned to Naomi, who nodded and slipped around to the fire escape. Within moments, Naomi had scaled the metal frame and positioned herself outside the window, peering in. She held up 2 fingers, signaling 2 men in the room. Amara mouthed, "Ready?" Naomi nodded, her grip tightening on the handle of her baton. Amara counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. Naomi shattered the silence, crashing through the window and landing on the floor in a crouch. The 2 men inside barely had time to react before Amara kicked the door open, her presence a blur of precision and force. The first man lunged at Naomi, but she sidestepped him, landing a sharp elbow to his jaw and sending him sprawling. The second reached for a weapon on the table, but Amara disarmed him with a swift strike to his wrist before slamming him against the wall. "Don't move!" Amara growled, her voice cold and commanding. Naomi secured the first man with a zip tie, glancing around the room. Papers and a laptop were scattered across the table, along with a small stack of cash. She grabbed the laptop, shoving it into her bag. "Where's the rest of your crew?" Amara demanded, tightening her grip on the man pinned against the wall. The man sneered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "We'll just rebuild. You're wasting your time." Amara leaned closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That's not your call to make." The man glared at her, but said nothing. Naomi grabbed the stack of papers, quickly flipping through them. "Amara, look at this," she said, holding up a sheet. Amara glanced over, her eyes scanning the document. It was a ledger, detailing shipments, payments, and contacts. A name stood out near the top. Martin Kane. "This is it," Amara said, her voice tense. "This ties the safe house directly to him." Naomi nodded, slipping the papers into her bag. "Let's go before backup arrives." The twins moved quickly, leaving the two men restrained and unconscious as they slipped out the way they came. Back at the van, Agent Brooks greeted them with a look of relief. "What did you find?" he asked. Amara handed him the ledger, her expression grim. "Enough to put Kane on the radar. This safe house is directly connected to his operations." Brooks flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. "This is good," he said. "Really good. We'll cross-reference this with what we've already got. If the other targets pan out, we'll have enough to bring him in." Naomi folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "Let's not celebrate yet. This is just the beginning." Amara nodded, her voice steady. "The safe house is down, but the warehouse is next. Let's finish this." The hum of the car engine filled the silence as Amara and Naomi drove down the dark stretch of highway, leaving the city behind. The distant glow of streetlights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the pitch-black expanse of open fields and towering trees. The night seemed endless, the journey ahead just as daunting. Naomi glanced at the GPS mounted on the dashboard, the faint blue light illuminating her face. "We've got about 2 hours until we cross the state line," she said, breaking the silence. "This warehouse better be worth the trip." Amara, seated in the passenger seat, stared out at the empty road, her mind racing. If Brooks's intel is right, it will be. He said this place isn't just a storage site, it's a command center. If Kane's people are coordinating anything major, it'll start there. Naomi exhaled sharply, her hands tightening on the wheel. "Still feels like we're chasing shadows. Every time we get close, it's like the target moves." "That's how networks like this work," Amara replied, her voice steady. "They're designed to be flexible. If one piece falls, the rest can keep running. That's why we have to hit them where it hurts. Find their infrastructure and tear it down." Naomi gave a small nod, but said nothing, her gaze fixed on the road. The weight of their mission hung heavily between them, the enormity of what they were facing pressing down on both of them. After a long pause, Amara leaned forward, pulling the laptop from the bag at her feet. She opened it, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as she accessed the files they'd recovered from the safe house. "These documents," she began, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through pages of data. "It's not just shipment logs and payment records. There are personnel files here. Names, aliases, even locations." Naomi glanced over briefly. "Locations? As in other hubs?" Amara nodded, her eyes scanning the screen. "Looks like it. This warehouse we're heading to, it's not just storing weapons or cash. It's a communications hub. They're using it to coordinate with other cells across the region." Naomi let out a low whistle. "So, if we take this place down, we cripple their ability to operate," Amara finished. "At least in this area. But it also means they'll fight hard to protect it." Naomi's expression hardened, her jaw tightening. "Let them try. We've handled worse." The car fell silent again, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt the only sound. Amara leaned back in her seat, her mind still racing. "Brooks said this warehouse is bigger," she said, almost to herself. "More people, more security, more intel. We're not walking into the same kind of fight we had at the safe house." Naomi smirked faintly. "Good. I was starting to get bored." Amara shot her a look, but couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Just don't get cocky. If this place is as important as we think, they'll be ready for us." "Let them be ready," Naomi replied, her voice firm. "We'll be ready too." The miles passed in relative silence, the tension between them gradually giving way to quiet determination. As the city skyline faded entirely, replaced by rural farmland, the GPS chimed, signaling the approach of their destination. "We're close," Naomi said, her grip on the wheel tightening. "How do you want to play this?" Amara leaned forward, studying the map on the Jeep. "We scout the area first," she said. "Figure out their patrols, weak points, any gaps in their security. If we can get in and out without alerting them, great. But if it comes to a fight, we finish it," Naomi said, finishing the thought. Amara nodded. "Exactly." As they neared the town where the warehouse was located, the terrain began to shift. The fields gave way to industrial buildings and wide-open lots, the faint hum of activity in the distance. Naomi pulled into a small, run-down motel just off the highway, parking the car in a shadowed corner of the lot. "This'll have to do for now," she said, shutting off the engine. Amara climbed out, stretching as she surveyed the area. The motel was as nondescript as they came. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign, and an air of quiet neglect. It was the kind of place no one asked questions, which made it perfect for their purposes. Inside their room, Amara spread the documents and maps across the small table, while Naomi unpacked their gear. The room was cramped, with faded wallpaper and a single flickering lamp, but the twins paid it no mind. "We've got one shot at this," Amara said, tapping the map. "If we're going to hit this warehouse, we need to do it right. No mistakes." Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, her expression serious. "Then we get some rest and hit it tomorrow night. We're no good if we're running on fumes." Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed. But first thing in the morning, we recon the area. I want to know every exit, every guard rotation, every camera they've got." Naomi smirked faintly. "Sounds like a plan, boss." Amara rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. "Let's just get through this in one piece." The twins settled in for the night, the weight of their mission heavy, but their resolve unshaken. The warehouse was their next step, a larger target, a bigger risk, but also a chance to gain the upper hand. The first rays of dawn crept through the thin curtains of the motel room as Naomi stirred awake. The faint buzz of her phone vibrating on the bedside table pulled her out of sleep. She groaned, reaching over to silence it, only to see the name Agent Brooks flashing on the screen. "Amara," she muttered, tossing the phone to her sister, who was already sitting up and lacing her boots. Amara caught the phone with one hand and answered it. "What is it, Brooks?" On the other end, Brooks's voice was sharp and to the point. "Change of plans. You're not going in alone this time. We're sending a tactical team to assist you. I'll meet you in the field in an hour." Amara raised an eyebrow, glancing at Naomi. "Tactical team? What's the catch?" "No catch," Brooks replied. "We've been reviewing the intel you provided. This warehouse isn't just a hub. It's one of the largest distribution points in the region. If we hit this place hard, we'll deal a significant blow to the network. But you'll need the firepower to do it right." Amara sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "All right, but we call the shots once we're on site." "Agreed," Brooks said. "See you soon." Amara hung up and set the phone down, her expression thoughtful. "Tactical team?" Naomi asked, tying her braid back. "Looks like we're not flying solo this time," Amara said. "Brooks thinks this place is too big to take down without backup." "Can't say I disagree," Naomi shrugged, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "As long as they stay out of our way, I'm fine with it." The two packed their gear quickly and headed out, the chill of the early morning air biting at their skin as they loaded into their car. The drive to the rendezvous point was quiet, both sisters mentally preparing for what lay ahead. When they arrived, they found a black SUV parked discreetly near the edge of a wooded area that overlooked the warehouse. Brooks stood beside it, flanked by 4 members of the tactical team, each outfitted in black gear and armed to the teeth. "Morning," Brooks said, nodding to the twins. "Looks like you brought the cavalry," Naomi said, eyeing the team. "They're here to assist, not take over," Brooks assured her. "You two lead the operation. They'll follow your orders." Amara crossed her arms, studying the tactical team. "What's the plan?" Brooks unfolded a map of the warehouse, spreading it out on the hood of the SUV. "The warehouse has 3 main entry points: the front, the loading docks in the back, and a service entrance on the east side. Intel suggests they've got at least a dozen men inside, but that number could change depending on their reinforcements. We split up, Amara said, her voice decisive. Naomi and I will take the east side. The tactical team can cover the front and the loading docks. We'll coordinate to make sure no one gets out. Brooks nodded, his expression serious. Sounds solid. Once we're inside, we'll secure the intel and neutralize any resistance. This isn't a smash and grab. We need to make sure we leave with something we can use. Naomi smirked faintly. Sounds like our kind of mission. The team moved into position as the sun climbed higher into the sky, the calm before the storm settling over the group. Amara and Naomi crouched near the tree line, their eyes fixed on the warehouse as they communicated through their earpieces. Team Alpha in position, one of the tactical officers said over the comms. Team Bravo ready, another voice chimed in. East side ready, Amara said, glancing at Naomi, who gave her a nod. Copy that, Brooks said. On my mark. The seconds ticked by like hours, the tension palpable as the teams awaited the signal. Finally, Brooks's voice came through the comms. Go. The tactical team moved first, breaching the front and rear entrances with calculated precision. The sharp crack of flashbangs echoed through the air, followed by shouts as the gang scrambled to respond. Amara and Naomi slipped through the east side service door, their movements silent and deliberate. The interior of the warehouse was massive, the towering shelves packed with crates marked with gang insignias. Two gang members appeared in the hallway ahead, their weapons drawn. Naomi took the lead, disarming the first man with a swift strike to his wrist before slamming him into the wall. Amara followed, delivering a knockout punch to the second before he could react. Clear, Naomi said, her voice steady. They moved deeper into the warehouse, the sounds of the tactical team engaging the gang echoing in the distance. Amara paused as they reached a large office overlooking the main floor. This has to be where they're coordinating, she said, nodding toward the door. Naomi tried the handle. It was locked. Cover me, she said, pulling out her lock-picking tools. Within seconds, the door clicked open, and the twins stepped inside. The office was filled with maps, documents, and computer monitors displaying security feeds from the warehouse. Jackpot, Amara said, pulling out a flash drive and plugging it into the main terminal. Naomi scanned the documents on the desk, her eyes narrowing. This is bigger than we thought, she said. They've got connections to other warehouses, shipments, even potential targets. Amara nodded, her voice grim. We need to get this back to Brooks. The mission was far from over. But as the twins gathered the intel, one thing became clear. The fight was only just beginning. The faint hum of distant commotion echoed through the cavernous warehouse as Amara and Naomi moved swiftly through the shadows. The air was thick with tension, their senses heightened with every step. The tactical team's initial breach had gone as planned, but the sporadic bursts of static over the comms told a different story. Something wasn't right. Keep moving, Amara whispered, her voice barely audible as she scanned the aisles of towering crates. We're not alone in here, Naomi nodded, her breathing steady, her grip tightening on her baton. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the floor, every flicker of movement making her heart pound harder. From their vantage point near a stack of shipping crates, they had a clear view of the central loading area. A handful of gang members scrambled to reinforce their positions, dragging crates and setting up makeshift barriers. They're gearing up, Naomi murmured. They must have realized we're not just here to snoop around. Amara's lips pressed into a thin line. They're disorganized, though. Probably didn't expect us to hit them this fast. Naomi arched a brow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Well, let's keep it that way. But just as they prepared to move, a sharp noise pierced the tension. A clatter of metal as something fell to the floor on the far side of the warehouse. The twins froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. That wasn't us, Naomi said under her breath. Amara's gaze swept the shadows, her body tensing. And it wasn't Brooks's team either. The sound of hurried footsteps followed, faint but deliberate. The gang was closing in, their movements calculated now. Something's wrong, Naomi muttered. Static crackled over their earpieces, followed by a strained voice. Team Alpha, Encountering resistance at the main entrance. We're taking fire. Amara tapped her comm. What about Bravo? No response. Just more static. The air felt heavier now, the tension suffocating as the twins realized they were being herded. The sporadic gunfire in the distance served as a grim reminder that the tactical team was engaged, and no help was coming anytime soon. We need to find another way out, Amara whispered, motioning for Naomi to follow her deeper into the warehouse. The twins moved with practiced stealth, weaving through the labyrinth of crates and machinery. The faint glow of the emergency lights cast eerie shadows, and the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. They're circling us, Naomi murmured, her voice tight, trying to box us in. Amara's eyes darted toward the rafters overhead, spotting a catwalk that ran the length of the warehouse. There, she said, pointing. We get up there, we'll have a better view of their positions. Naomi nodded, and the two made their way toward a rusted metal staircase. But as they reached the base, a voice cut through the silence. There they are! Amara and Naomi turned sharply to see 3 gang members emerging from behind a stack of crates, their weapons raised. Go! Amara hissed, shoving Naomi toward the stairs as she ducked behind cover. Naomi bolted up the steps, her boots clanging softly against the metal as she climbed. Amara stayed low, darting between crates to draw the gang's attention. Split up and flank them! One of the men shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. Naomi reached the top of the stairs and crouched, peering down at the chaos below. Amara moved like a shadow, her movements swift and precise, as she outmaneuvered the gang members. They're spreading out, Naomi said through the comm. They're trying to cut us off. Let them try, Amara replied, her voice calm despite the rising tension. But the situation was unraveling faster than they'd anticipated. More gang members emerged from the shadows, their numbers swelling as reinforcements poured in from the far side of the warehouse. Naomi's jaw tightened as she scanned the scene. There's too many of them, she muttered. Amara darted toward the staircase, sliding behind cover as bullets ricocheted off the metal railings. They're funneling us, she said, her voice grim. This was a trap from the start. Naomi's comm crackled again, Brooks's voice cutting through the static. We're pinned down at the south entrance. They're coming in waves. Repeat, we need backup. Amara cursed under her breath, her mind racing. Naomi, we can't hold this position. We need to regroup with Brooks's team. Naomi glanced down at her sister, then at the swarm of gang members below. How are we supposed to get through that? We'll figure it out, Amara said, her tone resolute. We always do. The twins exchanged a quick nod, their bond stronger than any words could convey. The fight was inevitable now, the odds stacked against them, but they weren't about to back down. As the gang closed in, the twins prepared for the fight of their lives, their determination unshaken. Chaos and pain loomed ahead, but they knew one thing for certain. They weren't going down without a fight. The air in the warehouse erupted with the deafening sound of shouts, footsteps, and gunfire. Amara and Naomi pressed their backs against the cold steel of the catwalk railing, their eyes scanning the chaos below. The gang swarmed the warehouse floor like ants, their movements calculated and relentless. They're everywhere, Naomi muttered, her voice barely audible over the commotion. Amara's jaw tightened as she peered over the edge of the catwalk. We've faced worse, she said, though the tension in her voice betrayed her confidence. From their vantage point, the twins could see Brooks's tactical team engaged in a fierce firefight at the south entrance. Flashes of gunfire lit up the dimly lit space as the team tried to hold their ground against an onslaught of gang members. Brooks, what's your status? Amara asked through her comm. We're holding, but barely. Brooks's voice crackled back. They've got us pinned. We can't advance until you take some of the heat off. Amara glanced at Naomi, her expression hardening. Looks like we're the cavalry. Naomi smirked faintly, her grip tightening on her baton. Let's give them something to worry about. The twins moved in unison, navigating the narrow catwalk with practiced precision. They found a vantage point overlooking the main floor, where a cluster of gang members had set up makeshift barricades. Ready? Amara whispered. Always, Naomi replied. Without hesitation, The twins sprang into action. Naomi leapt from the catwalk, landing with a controlled roll behind a stack of crates. Before the gang members could react, she was on them. Her baton a blur of motion as she disarmed and incapacitated two men in quick succession. Amara followed, descending the catwalk ladder with the agility of a predator. She hit the ground running, delivering a brutal kick to the back of a man's knee, before driving her elbow into his jaw. The gang was caught off guard by the sudden assault, their formation breaking as the twins tore through them with calculated ferocity. "They're regrouping!" Naomi shouted, dodging a swing from a crowbar-wielding thug. She countered with a sharp strike to his ribs, sending him sprawling. Amara ducked under a wild punch, grabbing her attacker by the arm and twisting it sharply. The sickening crack of bone echoed through the air as the man screamed and collapsed. Despite their skill and coordination, the twins were outnumbered. For every gang member they took down, another two seemed to appear. The fight grew more chaotic by the second, the warehouse floor a blur of movement and violence. One of the gang members, a hulking man with a scar running down his face, charged at Naomi with a pipe. She barely dodged the first swing, the metal whistling past her ear. "Naomi, watch out!" Amara shouted, slamming her shoulder into another opponent to clear a path. "I see him!" Naomi called back, her voice steady. She feinted to the left, drawing the man off balance, before delivering a spinning kick to his chest. The force of the blow sent him crashing into a stack of crates, the pipe clattering to the floor. Amara wasn't faring much better. Two men had cornered her against a pillar, their fists flying in a relentless barrage. She blocked one punch, countered another, but a third struck her in the ribs, making her gasp in pain. "Amara!" Naomi shouted, rushing to her sister's aid. She grabbed a metal rod from the ground and hurled it like a spear, striking one of the men in the shoulder. The distraction gave Amara the opening she needed. She spun low, sweeping the legs out from under the second man, before delivering a brutal stomp to his chest. "Thanks," Amara panted, her hand pressed to her side. "Don't mention it," Naomi replied, offering her a quick nod before turning back to the fray. The gang was relentless, their numbers seeming endless as they pressed their attack. The twins fought back with everything they had, their movements a blend of precision and raw power. But the toll was beginning to show. Cuts and bruises marked their skin, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Through the chaos, a new sound cut through the air, the piercing wail of a siren. Amara and Naomi paused for a brief moment, their eyes meeting. "That's our signal," Amara said. Naomi nodded, wiping blood from her lip. "Let's finish this." With renewed determination, the twins launched into one final assault, their strikes landing with brutal efficiency. They fought side by side, covering each other's blind spots as they pushed the gang back inch by inch. Brooks's voice crackled over the comm. "We're advancing! Keep them distracted." "Copy that," Amara replied, her focus unwavering. The fight was brutal and unrelenting, but as the tactical team pushed forward, the tide began to turn. The gang's confidence wavered, their formation crumbling under the combined assault. "Fall back!" one of the gang members shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The twins didn't let up, their movements swift and deadly as they drove the gang into retreat. The warehouse floor was a battlefield, but the tide was shifting in their favor. The fight wasn't over yet, but as the first rays of dawn began to pierce through the warehouse windows, one thing was clear. The gang's stronghold was crumbling, and the twins weren't stopping until it was gone. The gang had retreated further into the warehouse, leaving behind overturned crates, scattered weapons, and the groans of those too injured to flee. Amara and Naomi crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, their eyes darting across the dimly lit space. The tactical team's voices crackled faintly over the comms, punctuated by the sound of boots on concrete. "They're regrouping," Naomi whispered, peering around the edge of the container. "They're not gone. They're digging in," Amara nodded, her grip tightening on her baton. "They're trying to fortify their position. We can't give them the chance." Brooks's voice came through the comms, steady but urgent. Team Alpha, hold your ground at the south entrance. Bravo, push forward and cut off their escape routes. Amara, Naomi, how's it looking on your end? Amara tapped her comm. Still pockets of resistance, but they're falling back. We're moving forward. Keep it steady, Brooks replied. We're not taking chances. Clear it one section at a time. The twins exchanged a quick nod and moved forward cautiously, their footsteps silent on the concrete floor. The warehouse felt like a labyrinth, the towering shelves and stacks of crates creating blind corners and potential ambush points at every turn. Naomi raised a fist, signaling Amara to stop as she heard faint whispers up ahead. The twins pressed themselves against the wall, their ears straining to catch the conversation. They're pushing in from the south, a man's voice hissed, tense and hurried. We've got to hold them off until Kane's reinforcements get here. And how long is that going to take? Another voice snapped. Just shut up and hold the line. Amara glanced at Naomi, her expression grim. Reinforcements weren't coming anytime soon, not if they had anything to say about it. Silently, the twins moved into position, flanking the group of gang members huddled near a barricade of crates. Naomi signaled 3 fingers, counting down. 3, 2, 1. They struck with precision, their movements swift and decisive. Naomi disarmed the first man with a sharp twist of his wrist, slamming him against the crates before he could shout a warning. Amara moved like a shadow, delivering a quick blow to another man's legs before knocking him unconscious with the hilt of her baton. The third man lunged at Naomi with a crowbar, but she sidestepped his swing and delivered a brutal elbow to his jaw, dropping him instantly. Clear, Naomi said, her breathing steady despite the exertion. Amara nodded, scanning the area. Let's keep moving. They're losing ground. The twins pushed deeper into the warehouse, systematically clearing each section. Every corner brought a new challenge. Gang members lying in wait behind overturned crates, others taking desperate shots from elevated positions. But the tactical team was right behind them, coordinating their movements with precision to cut off every escape route. East side secured, a voice came through the comms. South entrance locked down, another reported. The gang's hold on the warehouse was crumbling, their remaining members scattering in disarray. Amara and Naomi reached the main storage area, a cavernous room filled with rows of crates, marked with the gang's insignia. They've got to be hiding something big here, Naomi said, her eyes scanning the rows of containers. Then let's find it, Amara replied, motioning for her sister to take the left flank while she moved right. As they navigated the maze of crates, the faint sound of a metal door creaking open caught Amara's attention. She held up a hand, signaling Naomi to stop. They're trying to slip out, she whispered. Naomi nodded, adjusting her grip on her baton. Let's shut it down. They moved toward the sound, finding a group of 4 gang members struggling to open a large steel door leading to a loading bay. One of them turned and spotted the twins, his eyes widening in panic. Move! He shouted, shoving the door open and bolting outside. Amara and Naomi gave chase, their boots pounding against the concrete as they pursued the fleeing men. 2 gang members tripped over debris, and Naomi was on them in an instant, her strikes swift and punishing. Amara caught up to the leader, tackling him to the ground just as he reached the edge of the loading dock. Not so fast, she growled, twisting his arm behind his back. The man writhed beneath her, cursing and spitting. You think you've won? He snarled. This is just one warehouse. You'll never stop us all. We'll see about that, Amara said coldly, binding his hands with zip ties. By the time the twins returned to the main floor, the tactical team had secured the remaining gang members. Brooks stood in the center of the room, surveying the scene with a satisfied nod. Warehouse secured, he said through the comms. Let's start cataloging everything. I want every crate opened, every document photographed. If Kane's got connections here, we'll find them. Amara and Naomi exchanged a weary glance, the adrenaline of the fight finally giving way to exhaustion. But as they looked around at the dismantled stronghold, they couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. One step closer, Naomi said quietly. Amara nodded, her gaze steely. And we're not stopping until it's done. The atmosphere in the FBI's temporary command center was electric. The tension from the warehouse raid had given way to a quiet urgency as analysts pored over the stacks of documents and encrypted files recovered during the operation. The twins sat at the edge of the room, their eyes fixed on the monitors displaying reams of data. "We've been combing through everything for hours," an analyst said, rubbing his temples as he flipped through a stack of printed documents. "Most of it is logistics, shipping schedules, payment ledgers, inventory lists. It's damning, but it's not enough to tie directly to Kane." Naomi leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers on the table. "So we're still chasing ghosts?" she muttered. "Not quite," another analyst interjected, his tone cautious but intrigued. "We found something buried in the encrypted emails. Something subtle. It almost looks like it was meant to blend in." Amara's gaze sharpened. "What kind of something?" The analyst pulled up a file on the main monitor. "This ledger tracks payments routed through one of Kane's shell companies, but there's a specific series of transactions flagged for consultation fees. On the surface, it looks innocuous, but the amounts don't make sense for the services listed. They're massive, far larger than what you'd expect for legitimate consulting work." Naomi frowned, leaning forward. "So it's a cover?" "Exactly," the analyst said, zooming in on the details. "And here's the kicker. The recipient of these payments is another shell company we've tied to Kane's personal accounts. He's laundering money directly into his own pockets." A murmur rippled through the room as the significance of the discovery sank in. Brooks, who had been standing near the back, stepped forward, his expression grim. "This is what we've been waiting for," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "It's not just circumstantial. This ties Kane to the financial backbone of the network. If we can corroborate this with the rest of the intel, we've got him." Amara exchanged a glance with Naomi, her lips pressing into a thin line. "So, what's the next move?" Brooks pulled up another document on the monitor, this one outlining the upcoming meeting of Kane's higher-ups. The emails also reference a meeting, one that's happening sooner than we thought. Kane's planning to gather his top people at a private estate just outside the city. If he gets spooked, there's a high chance he'll use this as an opportunity to flee. Naomi crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. "And if he gets away, he'll disappear. He's got the money and resources to make sure we never find him again." "Exactly," Brooks said. "Which is why we can't wait for the perfect moment. This intel gives us probable cause to act now, but we need to move carefully. Kane's estate is heavily secured, and if he catches wind of what we're planning, he'll be gone before we get through the gate." Amara's jaw tightened. "So we hit him before he has the chance. What's the plan?" Brooks motioned toward the tactical team gathered near the back of the room. "We're coordinating with local authorities and federal marshals to execute a warrant at the estate. But it's not just about getting through the front door. We need to ensure Kane doesn't slip through an escape route." "That's where you two come in." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "There's a service road that runs along the back of the property," Brooks explained, pulling up a satellite image of the estate. "It's secluded and easy to miss, but it's the most likely escape route if things go south. You'll be stationed there to intercept him if he tries to run." Amara studied the map, her mind racing. "And if he doesn't take the bait, then you secure the perimeter and provide backup to the entry team," Brooks said. "Either way, we're bringing him in." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the weight of the mission. For the twins, this was the culmination of everything they had fought for. The chance to take down the man who had orchestrated so much destruction. Naomi broke the silence, her voice calm but resolute. "When do we move?" "Tonight," Brooks said. "The warrant will be finalized within the hour. Once it's in hand, we roll out." Amara nodded, rising from her chair. "Then let's make sure we're ready. We're not letting him slip away." As the twins prepared their gear, the room buzzed with activity. Analysts finalized the intel, tactical officers reviewed the layout of the estate, and Brooks coordinated with the local SWAT team. Naomi adjusted the strap on her vest, glancing at her sister. "Feels like the end game, doesn't it?" Amara smirked faintly. "It is. For him, at least." The two shared a brief moment of understanding before turning back to the task at hand. This wasn't just another mission. It was the culmination of everything they had been fighting for. As the clock ticked closer to the operation, the twins felt the weight of the moment settle over them. They had one chance to bring Cain to justice, and they weren't about to let it slip through their fingers. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of deep orange and shadowed purple as the FBI convoy rolled out from the command center. The hum of engines and the quiet murmur of final preparations filled the air inside the lead vehicle, where Amara and Naomi sat with Agent Brooks. The tension was palpable, every movement deliberate, every word measured. "This estate isn't just some luxurious hideout," Brooks began, pointing to the detailed floor plan displayed on the tablet in his hand. "It's a fortress. High walls, motion sensors, armed guards, and at least 3 potential escape routes. Cain isn't taking any chances." Amara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map. "What about his private security? How many are we looking at?" "Between 15 and 20, based on the intel," Brooks replied. "They're not just thugs. They're well-trained and well-armed. They know what they're doing." Naomi smirked faintly, her tone dry. "Well, so do we." Brooks glanced at her, a flicker of a smile crossing his face, before his expression turned serious again. "This isn't just about getting in. We have to be precise. Cain's estate is outfitted with multiple safe rooms, and if he makes it into one, it'll buy him enough time to call in backup, or worse, escape entirely." Amara tapped the screen, her finger tracing the escape routes. "And that's where we come in. The service road behind the estate. What's the layout like?" Brooks pulled up a satellite image. "It's heavily wooded, with limited visibility, perfect for a quick getaway, which is why you two will be stationed there. If Cain bolts, he'll be heading your way." Naomi nodded, her expression grim. "And if he doesn't, then you join the main team and help clear the estate," Brooks said. "But if he runs, you're our last line of defense." The twins exchanged a glance, their silent communication as seamless as ever. This was what they were trained for, what they excelled at. As the convoy neared the estate, the tactical team began their final checks. Weapons were loaded, comms were tested, and each member reviewed their role in the operation. Amara and Naomi stood by the rear of their vehicle, adjusting their gear and syncing their comms with the team. "This feels different," Naomi said quietly, tightening the strap on her vest. "It is," Amara replied, her tone steady. "Cain's not just another target. He's the one pulling the strings, the one responsible for everything we've been fighting against. This is our chance to end it." Naomi nodded, her jaw tightening. "No room for mistakes." "None," Amara agreed. Brooks approached them, his demeanor calm but focused. "We're 5 minutes out. Once we hit the estate, Team Alpha will breach the main gate, while Bravo secures the perimeter. You two will move into position along the service road and hold until we confirm Cain's location." "Understood," Amara said. Brooks hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting between the twins. "I know I don't have to say this, but be careful. Cain's desperate. He knows what's at stake, and he won't go down without a fight." Naomi smirked faintly. "Good, neither will we." The convoy came to a halt just beyond the tree line surrounding the estate, the vehicles hidden under the cover of darkness. The tactical team moved silently, their movements precise as they spread out to their designated positions. Amara and Naomi slipped into the shadows, making their way toward the service road. The dense foliage provided cover, but it also limited their visibility, forcing them to rely on their instincts and training. "This is the spot," Amara whispered, crouching behind a large tree. Naomi nodded, scanning the area with her thermal scope. "No movement yet. He's still inside." The comms crackled softly as Brooks's voice came through. "Team Alpha, in position. Breaching in 3, 2, 1. A muffled explosion echoed through the night, followed by the sound of shouting and gunfire. The raid had begun. Amara and Naomi remained still, their senses on high alert as they listened to the chaos unfolding at the estate. The tactical team was making progress, but the risk of Cain slipping through their fingers loomed large. "Stay sharp," Amara murmured. "If he's coming this way, he won't be alone." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the twins maintained their vigil. The sound of boots crunching on gravel suddenly reached their ears. Faint, but distinct. "Movement," Naomi whispered, her grip tightening on her weapon. Amara nodded, her heart pounding as she raised her binoculars. Through the dense foliage, she spotted a small group of figures moving quickly down the service road. At the center of the group was a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows. But there was no mistaking who it was. "Kane," Amara said, her voice low but firm. "He's making his move." Naomi smirked, her adrenaline surging. "Looks like we've got ourselves a runner." The twins exchanged a quick nod, their movements fluid as they prepared to intercept. The final act was beginning, and Kane was about to learn that there was no escape. The gravel crunched under the hurried footsteps of Kane and his small entourage as they made their way down the service road. His usually composed demeanor was replaced by sharp, frantic movements, and the faint beam of his flashlight darted erratically across the path ahead. "Pick up the pace!" Kane hissed at the two guards flanking him, their weapons drawn and their heads constantly swiveling. "We need to get to the car before they breach the estate." From their concealed position behind the dense foliage, Amara and Naomi tracked every step. Amara's sharp eyes followed Kane's movements, while Naomi kept her focus on the guards, her thermal scope highlighting their positions. "They're moving fast," Naomi murmured, her voice barely audible over the comm. "But they don't see us yet." "Good," Amara replied, adjusting her grip on her baton. "We take them out before they know what hit them. Quiet and clean." Naomi smirked faintly. "Quiet isn't exactly my specialty." Amara shot her a quick look, but didn't respond. There was no time for banter now. As the group drew closer, the twins waited until the perfect moment. They'd done this 100 times before, but the stakes had never been higher. Kane was the end game. "Now!" Amara whispered, and the twins sprang into action. Naomi darted out first, moving like a shadow as she intercepted the guard on the left. Her baton cracked against his wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon with a yelp of pain. Before he could react, she delivered a swift blow to his knee, sending him crumpling to the ground. Amara was right behind her, targeting the second guard. She ducked under his wild swing and countered with a sharp jab to his ribs, followed by a kick that knocked him off balance. He stumbled back, but before he could recover, Amara landed a precise strike to his temple, rendering him unconscious. Kane froze, his wide eyes darting between the twins as they closed in on him. What?" he stammered, his usual composure shattered. "Don't bother running," Amara said, her voice cold and steady. "You're not getting out of here." Kane's fear twisted into anger, and he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small pistol. "Stay back," he barked, his hand trembling slightly as he pointed the weapon at them. Naomi stepped closer, her expression unfazed. "You really think that's going to help you?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Back off!" Kane shouted, his voice rising in pitch. Amara moved like lightning, sidestepping to draw his attention as Naomi closed the distance. Before Kane could fire, Naomi slammed her baton against his wrist, forcing the pistol to clatter to the ground. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist and glaring at the twins. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he spat. Amara's gaze hardened, and she stepped forward until she was inches from him. "Oh, we know exactly who you are," she said, her voice low and deadly. "You're the reason countless lives have been destroyed. You're the one who built this empire of fear and pain. And now, it's over." Kane's bravado faltered, and he took a shaky step back. "You think this will stop anything?" he sneered. "Even if you take me down, someone else will rise up to take my place. You're wasting your time." Naomi grabbed him by the collar, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "We're not just taking you down," she said. "We're dismantling everything you've built, brick by brick, piece by piece, and you're going to watch it all burn." The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention, and moments later, Brooks and the tactical team emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the scene. "Stand down," Brooks ordered, though the command wasn't meant for the twins. It was for Kane. Amara released a breath, stepping back as Brooks and his team moved in to secure Kane. The man struggled briefly, his protests loud and venomous, but the steel cuffs snapped around his wrists silenced him quickly. "You've got nothing on me!" Kane shouted as they led him away. "Nothing that will stick." Brooks smirked faintly, holding up the stack of documents recovered from the warehouse. "Oh, we've got plenty." "You're done, Kane?" Naomi watched as they hauled him toward the convoy, her expression unreadable. "Think he'll stay behind bars?" she asked quietly. Amara nodded, her tone resolute. "With what we've found, he's not going anywhere. And even if he tries to fight it, we'll make sure he doesn't get back up." The twins stood in the clearing, the weight of the moment settling over them. The fight wasn't over. Not entirely. But they had won this battle. Kane's empire was crumbling. And with him in custody, the path to justice was finally clear. Naomi let out a slow breath, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Well," she said, her voice lightening slightly, "that was satisfying." Amara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." The two turned and walked back toward the convoy, the faint glow of dawn breaking over the horizon. The road ahead would still be long, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they could see the light at the end of it. The command center buzzed with quiet but focused activity as the FBI team processed the fallout from the night's operation. Maps and documents covered the walls, red markers circling the key locations linked to Kane's network. Monitors displayed live feeds of law enforcement raids being carried out across multiple states. Kane's arrest had triggered a domino effect, and the dismantling of his empire was well underway. Amara and Naomi stood off to the side, watching the controlled chaos unfold. Their exhaustion was evident, dark circles under their eyes, bruises on their faces, but their expressions remained resolute. Agent Brooks approached them, holding a thick folder. His usually stoic demeanor had softened slightly, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "We've made significant progress," he said, his voice steady. "With the intel we recovered and Kane's arrest, we've been able to execute warrants on 3 other major hubs. His operation is falling apart." Naomi arched an eyebrow, folding her arms. "And Kane? Is he talking yet?" Brooks smirked faintly, shaking his head. "Not yet, but it doesn't matter. The evidence we've gathered is airtight. Financial records, emails, encrypted communications, every piece ties back to him. He can fight it in court, but it's only a matter of time before he's convicted." Amara glanced at the monitors, her gaze lingering on a live feed of agents loading confiscated crates into trucks. "And what about the people he's hurt? The communities he's torn apart?" Brooks's expression turned somber. "It's going to take time to rebuild," he admitted. "Kane's network caused a lot of damage, but his influence is gone, and that's the first step. Local leaders and organizations will have the space to start reclaiming what was taken from them." Naomi nodded, though her jaw tightened slightly. "He gets a trial," she muttered, "a chance to plead his case, while so many of his victims never got the same opportunity." Amara placed a hand on her sister's shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "Justice doesn't always come quickly, but it comes. We've done our part. Now it's up to the system to finish the job." Brooks glanced between the two of them, his respect for the twins evident. "You've done more than anyone could have asked," he said. "Without you, this operation wouldn't have been possible." Naomi smirked faintly. "We don't do it for the credit." "No," Brooks said, his tone thoughtful. "But you deserve it all the same." The twins exchanged a brief look, their unspoken bond as strong as ever. For them, the mission had never been about recognition. It had always been about doing what was right. As the day wore on, the team worked tirelessly to finalize reports and prepare for the legal proceedings against Kane and his associate. The twins remained in the background, observing the ripple effects of their actions. Naomi leaned against the wall, her arms crossed as she watched an analyst compile a list of charges against Kane. Conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, arms trafficking. She read aloud, her tone dry. "Quite the resume." Amara chuckled softly, and he thought he was untouchable. Naomi's smirk faded slightly. as her gaze drifted toward the board of names and faces, the hierarchy of Cain's network, now riddled with red X's. "We've taken out the head," she said quietly, "but there's always another one waiting to take his place." Amara followed her gaze, her expression thoughtful. "Then we keep fighting," she said simply. Before Naomi could respond, Brooks approached them again, holding a small tablet. "There's one more thing I thought you'd want to see," he said, handing it to Amara. The screen displayed a live feed from the detention center where Cain was being held. He sat in a stark interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. A far cry from the confident, untouchable man he had once been. "He's not so smug anymore," Brooks said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Every time he realizes how much we've uncovered, you can see it chip away at him." Naomi took the tablet, her eyes narrowing as she studied Cain's defeated posture. "Good," she said bluntly. "He should feel every bit of the weight he's put on others." Amara nodded, her gaze steady. "And he will, for the rest of his life." Brooks took the tablet back, his expression softening. "You two should get some rest," he said. "You've earned it." Naomi smirked faintly, though exhaustion was evident in her eyes. "Rest sounds good," she admitted. As Brooks walked away, the twins lingered for a moment longer, the weight of their actions settling over them. They had brought down a man who had caused untold harm, but the fight for justice was never truly over. Amara placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "One battle at a time," she said quietly. Naomi nodded, her resolve unshaken. One battle at a time. As the sun set on the horizon, the twins walked out of the command center together, their silhouettes framed against the fading light. The road ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. A week later, the quiet hum of the small diner's neon sign was the only sound as Amara and Naomi sat in a corner booth, the remnants of their meal pushed aside. The familiar setting of their hometown provided a stark contrast to the chaos of the past weeks. The worn leather seats and the faint scent of coffee felt like a world away from the high-stakes missions and battles they'd faced. Naomi leaned back, her gaze drifting out the window to the street outside. It was late, and the town was quiet, save for the occasional car passing by. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said, breaking the silence. "Being back here, like nothing's changed." Amara stirred her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "The town hasn't changed," she said quietly. "But we have." Naomi smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. "We always knew this place wasn't perfect," she said. "Remember how we used to hear people talk? The things they'd say when they thought we weren't listening?" Amara nodded, her grip tightening on the mug in her hands. The subtle comments, the casual jokes, the way they'd act like it was all harmless. Naomi's smirk faded, replaced by a hardened look. "That's the part that always got me. How easy it was for them. Like it didn't even register that what they were saying was wrong. It was just normal to them." Amara's gaze turned to the window, her reflection staring back at her. "That's the problem," she said softly. "It's not just the big things, the hate crimes, the violence. It's the everyday stuff. The things people think are okay because no one calls them out on it. That's what lets the bigger stuff grow." Naomi let out a slow breath, her frustration evident. "And people like Cain take advantage of it. They exploit that ignorance, that complacency, build entire empires on it. But not anymore," Amara said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "We tore his empire down, and maybe it won't fix everything, but it's a start." Naomi glanced at her sister, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You always were the optimistic one." Amara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Not optimistic, just determined." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling over them. Despite everything they'd been through, the fight felt far from over. But sitting there, together, they found a moment of peace. Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You know, through all of it, everything we've faced, it's always been you and me, no matter what." Amara met her gaze, her expression softening. "Because that's how we were raised, to have each other's backs, always. Naomi nodded, her voice quiet but resolute. And we always will. The bond between them was unshakable. Forged through years of shared struggles and triumphs, they had faced the worst the world had to offer, and come out stronger for it. Amara set her mug down, a small smile playing on her lips. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" Naomi shrugged, her smirk returning. "Not our style, is it?" "Guess not," Amara said, her tone lightening. The door to the diner opened, and a young waitress walked in to clean up for the night. She paused when she saw the twins, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You two are the Johnson sisters, right?" she asked hesitantly. Naomi raised an eyebrow, glancing at Amara. "Yeah, that's us." "Why?" The waitress smiled nervously, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "I've heard about what you've been doing. Taking down those gangs, fighting back. It's inspiring. People like me don't always feel like we can do much, but seeing what you've done, it makes me think maybe we can." Amara and Naomi exchanged a glance, their expressions softening. "Thanks," Amara said, her voice kind but firm. "But it's not just about what we've done. It's about what everyone can do. Standing up, speaking out, even when it's hard. That's what makes the difference." The waitress nodded, her confidence growing. "I'll remember that." As the young woman walked away, Naomi leaned back, her smirk widening. "Looks like you're a motivational speaker now." Amara rolled her eyes, but she couldn't hide her smile, just saying what needed to be said. The two sisters fell into an easy silence, the weight of the past weeks lifting slightly. Outside, the town remained quiet, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like a different kind of quiet, one filled with hope, however fragile. Naomi raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. "To us, and to whatever fight comes next." Amara clinked her mug against her sister's, her smile unwavering. "To us." The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: whatever came next, they would face it together. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.